God is coming back again. Let's get back into the Secret Teachers of All Ages by Manly P. Hall.
Is consequently to be esteemed as the greatest good. Emotional reactions are classified as pleasant or gentle, harsh and mean. The end of pleasant emotion is pleasure. The end of harsh emotion, grief. The end of mean emotion, nothing. Through mental perversity, some men do not desire pleasure. In reality, however, pleasure, especially of a physical nature, is the true end of existence and exceeds in every way mental and spiritual enjoyments. Pleasure, furthermore, is limited wholly to the moment. Now is the only time. The past cannot be regarded without regret, and the future cannot be faced without misgiving. Therefore, neither is conducive to pleasure. No man should grieve, for grief is the most serious of all diseases. Nature permits man to do anything he desires. He is limited only by his own laws and customs. A philosopher is one free from envy, love, and superstition, and whose days are one long round of pleasure. Indulgence was thus elevated by Aristippus to the chief position among the virtues. He further declared philosophers to differ markedly from other men in that they alone would not change the order of their lives if all the laws of men were abolished. Among prominent philosophers influenced by the Cyrenaic doctrines were Hegesias, Anicetus, Theodorus, and Bion. The sect of the academic philosophers instituted by Plato, 427 to 347 BC, was divided into three major parts: the Old, the Middle, and the New Academy. Among the old academics were Speusippus, Xenocrates, Polemon, Crates, and Crantor. Arcesilaus instituted the Middle Academy, and Carneades founded the New. Chief among the masters of Plato was Socrates. Plato traveled widely and was initiated by the Egyptians into the profundities of Hermetic philosophy. He also derived much from the doctrines of the Pythagoreans. Cicero describes the threefold constitution of Platonic philosophy as comprising ethics, physics, and dialectics. Plato defined good as threefold in character: good in the soul, expressed through the virtues; good in the body, expressed through the symmetry and endurance of the parts; and good in the external world, expressed through social position and companionship. In the Book of Speusippus on Platonic Definitions, that great Platonist thus defines God: a being that lives immortally by means of himself alone, sufficing for his own blessedness, the eternal essence, cause of his own goodness. According to Plato, the One is the term most suitable for defining the Absolute, since the whole precedes the parts, and diversity is dependent on unity, but unity not on diversity. The One, moreover, is before being, for to be is an attribute or condition of the One. Platonic philosophy is based upon the postulation of three orders of being: that which moves unmoved, that which is self-moved, and that which is moved. That which is immovable but moves is anterior to that which is self-moved, which likewise is anterior to that which it moves. That in which motion is inherent cannot be separated from its motive power. It is therefore incapable of dissolution. Of such nature are the immortals. That which has motion imparted to it from another can be separated from the source of its animating principle. It is therefore subject to dissolution. Of such nature are immortal beings. Superior to both the mortals and the immortals is that condition which continually moves, yet itself is unmoved. To this constitution the power of abidance is inherent. It is therefore the divine permanence upon which all things are established. Being nobler even than self-motion, the unmoved mover is the first of all dignities. The Platonic discipline was founded upon the theory that learning is really reminiscence, or the bringing into objectivity of knowledge formerly acquired by the soul in a previous state of existence. At the entrance of the Platonic school in the Academy were written the words, "Let none ignorant of geometry enter here." Plato. From Thomason's Recueil des Figures, Groupes, Thermes, Fountains, Vases et autres ornements. Plato's real name was Aristocles. When his father brought him to study with Socrates, the great skeptic declared that on the previous night he had dreamed of a white swan, which was an omen that his new disciple was to become one of the world's illumined. There is a tradition that the immortal Plato was sold as a slave by the king of Sicily. After the death of Plato, his disciples separated into two groups. One, the academics, continued to meet in the academy where once he had presided. The other, the Peripatetics, removed to the Lyceum under the leadership of Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC. Plato recognized Aristotle as his greatest disciple and, according to Philoponus, referred to him as the mind of the school. If Aristotle were absent from the lectures, Plato would say, "The intellect is not here." Of the prodigious genius of Aristotle, Thomas Taylor writes in his introduction to the Metaphysics, "When we consider that he was not only well acquainted with every science, as his works abundantly evince, but that he wrote on almost every subject which is comprehended in the circle of human knowledge, and this with matchless accuracy and skill, we know not which to admire most, the penetration or extent of his mind." Of the philosophy of Aristotle, the same author says, "The end of Aristotle's moral philosophy is perfection through the virtues, and the end of his contemplative philosophy, a union with the one principle of all things." Aristotle conceived philosophy to be twofold, practical and theoretical. Practical philosophy embraced ethics and politics, theoretical philosophy, physics and logic. Metaphysics he considered to be the science concerning that substance which has the principle of motion and rest inherent to itself. To Aristotle, the soul is that by which man first lives, feels, and understands. Hence, to the soul he assigned three faculties: nutritive, sensitive, and intellective. He further considered the soul to be twofold, rational and irrational, and in some particulars elevated the sense perceptions above the mind. Aristotle defined wisdom as the science of first causes. The four major divisions of his philosophy are dialectics, physics, ethics, and metaphysics. God is defined as the first mover, the best of beings, an immovable substance separate from sensible things, void of corporeal quantity, without parts and indivisible. Platonism is based upon a priori reasoning, Aristotelianism upon a posteriori reasoning. Aristotle taught his pupil, Alexander the Great, to feel that if he had not done a good deed, he had not reigned that day. Among his followers were Theophrastus, Strato, Lyco, Aristo, Critolus, and Diodorus. Of skepticism, as propounded by Pyrrho of Elis, 365 to 275 BC, and by Timon, Sextus Empiricus said that those who seek must find or deny they have found or can find, or persevere in the inquiry. Those who suppose they have found truth are called dogmatists. Those who think it incomprehensible are the academics. Those who still seek are the skeptics. The attitude of skepticism towards the knowable is summed up by Sextus Empiricus in the following words: "But the chief ground of skepticism is that to every reason there is an opposite reason equivalent, which makes us forbear to dogmatize." The skeptics were strongly opposed to the dogmatists and were agnostic in that they held the accepted theories regarding deity to be self-contradictory and undemonstrable. "How," asked the skeptic, "can we have indubitate knowledge of God, knowing not his substance, form, or place? For, while philosophers disagree irreconcilably on these points, their conclusions cannot be considered as undoubtedly true." Since absolute knowledge was considered unattainable, the skeptics declared the end of their discipline to be in opinionatives, in disturbance, in impulsives, moderation, and in disquietives, suspension. The sect of the Stoics was founded by Zeno, 340 to 265 BC, the Citian, who studied under Cratius, the Cynic, from which sect the Stoics had their origin. Zeno was succeeded by Cleanthes, Chrysippus, Zeno of Tarsus, Diogenes, Antipater, Natius, and Posidonius. Most famous of the Roman Stoics are Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. The Stoics were essentially pantheists, since they maintained that as there is nothing better than the world is God. Zeno declared that the person of the world is diffused throughout it as seed. Stoicism is a materialistic philosophy, enjoining voluntary resignation to natural law. Chrysippus maintained that good and evil being contrary, both are necessary since each sustains the other. The soul was regarded as a body distributed throughout the physical form and subject to dissolution with it. Though some of the Stoics held that wisdom prolonged the existence of the soul, actual immortality is not included in their tenets. The soul was said to be composed of 8 parts: the 5 senses, the generative power, the vocal power, and an 8th, or hegemonic part. Nature was defined as God mixed throughout the substance of the world. All things were looked upon as bodies either corporeal or incorporeal. The problem of diversity. From Kircher's Ars Magna Sciendi. In the above diagram, Kircher arranges 18 objects in 2 vertical columns and then determines the number of arrangements in which they can be combined. By the same method, Kircher further estimates that 50 objects may be arranged in almost unlimited combinations. From this, it will be evident that infinite diversity is possible, for the countless parts of the universe may be related to each other in an incalculable number of ways, and through the various combinations of these limitless subdivisions of being, infinite individuality and infinite variety must inevitably result. Thus, it is further evident that life can never become monotonous or exhaust the possibilities of variety. Meekness marked the attitude of the Stoic philosopher. While Diogenes was delivering a discourse against anger, one of his listeners spat contemptuously in his face. Receiving the insult with humility, the great Stoic was moved to retort, "I am not angry, but am in doubt whether I ought to be so or not." Epicurus of Samos, 341 to 270 BC, was the founder of the Epicurean sect, which in many respects resembles the Syrianic, but is higher in its ethical standards. The Epicureans also posited pleasure as the most desirable state, but conceived it to be a grave and dignified state achieved through renunciation of those mental and emotional inconstancies which are productive of pain and sorrow. Epicurus held that as the pains of the mind and soul are more grievous than those of the body, so the joys of the mind and soul exceed those of the body. The Syrianics asserted pleasure to be dependent upon action or motion. The Epicureans claimed rest or lack of action to be equally productive of pleasure. Epicurus accepted the philosophy of Dematius concerning the nature of atoms and based his physics upon this theory. The Epicurean philosophy may be summed up in 4 canons. 1. Sense is never deceived, and therefore every sensation and every perception of an appearance is true. 2. Opinion follows upon sense and is superadded to sensation, and capable of truth or falsehood. 3. All opinion attested or not contradicted by the evidence of sense is true. 4. An opinion contradicted or not attested by the evidence of sense is false. Among the Epicureans of note were Metrodorus of Lampsacus, Zeno of Sidon, and Phaedrus. Eclecticism may be defined as the practice of choosing apparently irreconcilable doctrines from antagonistic schools and constructing therefrom a composite philosophic system in harmony with the convictions of the eclectic himself. Eclecticism can scarcely be considered philosophically or logically sound, for as individual schools arrive at their conclusions by different methods of reasoning, so the philosophic product of fragments from these schools must necessarily be built upon the foundation of conflicting premises. Eclecticism, accordingly, has been designated the layman's cult. In the Roman Empire, little thought was devoted to philosophic theory. Consequently, most of its thinkers were of the eclectic type. Cicero is the outstanding example of early eclecticism, for his writings are a veritable potpourri of invaluable fragments from earlier schools of thought. Eclecticism appears to have had its inception at the moment when men first doubted the possibility of discovering ultimate truth. Observing all so-called knowledge to be mere opinion at best, the less studious furthermore concluded that the wiser course to pursue was to accept that which appeared to be the most reasonable of the teachings of any school or individual. From this practice, however, arose a pseudo-broad-mindedness devoid of the element of preciseness found in true logic and philosophy. The Neo-Pythagorean school flourished in Alexandria during the first century of the era. Only two names stand out in connection with it: Apollonius of Tyana and Moderatus of Gades. Neo-Pythagoreanism is a link between the older pagan philosophies and Neoplatonism. Like the former, it contained many exact elements of thought derived from Pythagoras and Plato. Like the latter, it emphasized metaphysical speculation and ascetic habits. A striking similarity has been observed by several authors between Neo-Pythagoreanism and the doctrines of the Essenes. Special emphasis was laid upon the mystery of numbers, and it is possible that the Neo-Pythagoreans had a far wider knowledge of the true teachings of Pythagoras than is available today. Even in the first century, Pythagoras was regarded more as a god than a man, and the revival of his philosophy was resorted to apparently in the hope that his name would stimulate interest in the deeper systems of learning. But Greek philosophy had passed the zenith of its splendor. The mass of humanity was awakening to the importance of physical life and physical phenomena. The emphasis upon earthly affairs, which began to assert itself later, reached maturity of in 20th century materialism and commercialism, even though Neoplatonism was to intervene and many centuries passed before this emphasis took definite form. Aeneas at the Gate of Hell, from Virgil's Aeneid, Dryden's translation. Virgil describes part of the ritual of a Greek mystery, possibly the Eleusinian, in his account of the descent of Aeneas to the gate of hell under the guidance of the Sibyl. Of that part of the ritual portrayed above, the immortal poet writes, "Full in the midst of this infernal road, an elm displays her dusky arms abroad. The god of sleep there hides his heavy head, and empty dreams on every leaf are spread. Of various forms unnumbered spectres more, centaurs in double shapes besieged the door. Before the passage horrid Hydra stands, and Briareus with all his 100 hands, Gorgons, Geryon with his triple frame, and vain Chimera vomits empty flame. The chief unsheathed his shining steel prepared, though seized with sudden fear to force the guard, offering his brandished weapon at their face, had not the Sibyl stopped his eager pace, and told him what those empty phantoms were, forms without bodies and impassive air." Although Ammonius Saccas was long believed to be the founder of Neoplatonism, the school had its true beginning in Plotinus, AD 204 to 269. Prominent among the Neoplatonists of Alexandria, Syria, Rome, and Athens were Porphyry, Iamblichus, Celastius, the Emperor Julian, Plutarch, and Proclus. Neoplatonism was the supreme effort of decadent pagandom to publish and thus preserve for posterity its secret or unwritten doctrine. In its teachings, ancient idealism found its most perfect expression. Neoplatonism was concerned almost exclusively with the problems of higher metaphysics. It recognized the existence of a secret and all-important doctrine which from the time of the earliest civilizations had been concealed within the rituals, symbols, and allegories of religions and philosophies. To the mind unacquainted with its fundamental tenets, Neoplatonism may appear to be a mass of speculations interspersed with the extravagant flights of fancy. Such a viewpoint, however, ignores the institutions of the mysteries, those secret schools into